a blind cult leader who once released poison gas in the Tokyo subway, a former president who walked to the gallows with his head held high, a sniper who turned Washington into a deadly hunting ground, and an athlete, executed in haste amidst a global wave of outrage. 10 names, 10 countries, 10 different realities, 10 conflicting ideas of justice. They were not remembered for their last meals or final words. Each of them was a sentence. Controversial, divisive, and impossible to forget. Who were they? Why were they executed? And what made the world keep watching, even after everything was over? Get ready, because you're about to step inside some of the most notorious execution chambers in the world, where silence, at times, is even more haunting than the sound of gunfire. Before we begin, leave a comment. What country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far these stories have traveled. First, Saddam Hussein. Baghdad, early morning on December 30th, 2006. Camp Justice, a modest facility in the northern part of the city, suddenly became the place that closed a bloody chapter of history. Under the pale light of fluorescent lamps, a silver-haired man stepped into the room. His hands were tied behind his back. The rope hung above. He didn't scream. He didn't resist. He simply raised his head and looked straight ahead. Saddam Hussein, the man who held absolute power in Iraq for nearly 3 decades, had reached his final moment. For almost 30 years, Saddam was more than just a national leader. He was the very definition of total control. With an iron fist, he built his own empire, commanding the military, the intelligence agencies, the courts, and the fear of millions. Those who opposed him could disappear without a trace. A wrong look, at the wrong time, could cost an entire family. The Anfal campaign in the late 1980s was the clearest example. In the name of national security, he launched an ethnic purge against the Kurdish population in northern Iraq. Over 180,000 people were killed. Thousands of villages were wiped out. Women, children, the elderly, many were never found. In the town of Halabja, Iraqi forces used nerve gas, killing 5,000 civilians in a single day. Many others survived, but with lifelong injuries. It became one of the worst chemical attacks of the 20th century. Inside the regime, political purges were routine. A minister could be taken out in the middle of a meeting. Rivals vanished overnight. Even whispering his name made people look over their shoulders. Saddam's power came not from respect, but from fear, kept alive every single day. Yet at his trial in 2006, he was convicted for only one case: the killing of 148 villagers in Dujai after a failed assassination attempt. One crime, one death sentence, and one message. Sometimes, justice doesn't require listing every atrocity, just the one the world refuses to ignore. His execution took place during Eid al-Adha, one of the most sacred holidays in Islam. Some sources said he was offered a traditional Ramadan meal: rice, boiled chicken, honey water, but he refused. Inside the chamber, tension was razor sharp. Some guards shouted sectarian slogans. Saddam smiled, then began to recite the Shahada, the final declaration of faith in Islam. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. He spoke it loudly, clearly, without hesitation, as if death was nothing more than a final ritual. Moments later, the sentence was carried out. No one knows what he felt in that instant. Only the silence of the lifeless body, and a room that went completely still. The execution sparked immediate controversy. Some called it justice. Others saw it as nothing more than public revenge. But, right or wrong, one fact remains undeniable. Saddam Hussein was dead, and what he left behind still casts a long shadow over the world's history. Second, John Allen Muhammad. October 2002, Washington, D.C. was gripped by chaos. A woman collapsed at a gas station after filling her tank. No one heard a shot. No one saw an attacker. Hours later, a high school student was struck moments after stepping off a bus. Then, a man fell while mowing his lawn. The city fell into an unseen terror. People stayed indoors, schools closed. No one knew the nightmare was coming from the dark trunk of a deep blue Caprice, parked like an invisible trap. John Allen Muhammad, a former U.S. Army sniper, orchestrated this shocking sniper rampage. Over the final 3 weeks of 2002, he and 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo, whom he manipulated, carried out attacks that killed 10 people in the D.C. area. They did not fire in rapid succession. They left no trace. One shot, then disappeared, leaving a day of silence and fear. The Caprice was transformed into a mobile sniper station, a hole cut in the trunk for shooting, an internal radio, maps marking target locations. Muhammad called it the operation. Each morning he picked a location, chose a target, and waited. Investigators believed it was an organized terror plot aimed at ransom, but deeper motives emerged. Perhaps the rage of a forgotten veteran, filled with bitterness towards a society that turned its back on him. He was caught on October 24th in Maryland at a roadside rest area. Police surrounded the Caprice while he slept. No resistance, no words. His face was cold, as if he had waited for this moment for a long time. At his trial in Virginia, he faced charges of organized murder with terrorist intent. Nearly 400 pieces of evidence were presented, 130 witnesses testified from the witness stand. No explanations, no expression of remorse. His execution date was set, November 10, 2009 at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia. On a cold, dry night, under harsh fluorescent lights, a white-sheeted bed awaited. His last meal arrived, chicken with red sauce and a few sweet rolls. Simple, as though he had never existed. Muhammad ate in silence. When asked if he had any final words, he only shook his head. Not a word, not a look. At 9:11 p.m., lethal injection coursed into his vein. No convulsions, no final statements, only silence, echoing the invisible shadow he cast over America. John Allen Muhammad died as he lived his final years, unseen, unheard, and leaving questions no one could answer. Third, Troy Davis. On the night of September 21, 2011, the Georgia death row was bathed in a cold, yellow glow. In a small cell, Troy Davis lay motionless on a metal bed. Hands bound tightly, eyes open, mouth closed. No sign of a gasp. Outside, hundreds gathered. Across the globe, millions held their breath, watching to see if justice would be served, or if an innocent man would be executed. Back in August 1989, in Savannah, Georgia, 30-year-old police officer Mark McPhail was off duty when he intervened in a parking lot altercation. 2 shots rang out, one struck his face, another pierced his heart. He died on the spot. Hours later, 20-year-old Troy Davis was arrested and charged. The case had no DNA, no murder weapon, no blood, no confession. The death sentence relied entirely on 9 eyewitness testimonies. One said, "I heard a pop, looked up, and saw him with a gun." But Davis maintained his innocence, insisting the real shooter was Sylvester Coles, someone present that night. That name never appeared in the charges. His trial in 1991 lasted just days. The death penalty came swiftly, based solely on eyewitness statements. But starting in 1996, 7 of the 9 witnesses recanted. Some said the police pressured them. One admitted, "I didn't see anything. I just repeated what they told me." Human rights groups stepped in. The Justice for Troy campaign spread worldwide. Voices rose from all corners. Former President Jimmy Carter, Pope Benedict XVI, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Amnesty International, all calling for clemency. His execution was stayed 3 times, each delay a psychological hurdle. On the night of September 21st, he refused a special last meal. Instead, he received the standard tray: a cheeseburger, baked potatoes, baked beans, coleslaw, cookies, and grape juice. He ate a few bites in silence. When asked for final words, he shook his head. But later, through Amnesty International, he left a final message. The fight for justice does not end with me. At 9:08 p.m., procedures began. No crying, no confession, no plea for mercy. Troy Davis died in silence. And it was that silence, echoing around the world, that forced people to speak. If 7 out of 9 witnesses changed their stories, had we executed an innocent man? 4th, Stanley, Tookie Williams III, San Quentin, California, 12:01 in the morning, December 13, 2005. A large, bald black man was led into the execution chamber. He said nothing. He looked at no one. He declined the sedative. In his final moments, Stanley Tookie Williams chose silence. More than 3 decades earlier, Williams had been one of the most feared names in Los Angeles. In 1971, at just 17, he co-founded the Crips gang with Raymond Washington. What began as a youth protection alliance quickly morphed into something darker. Within a few years, the Crips became a symbol of street violence in Southern California, with criminal ties stretching all the way to the East Coast. Under Williams' leadership, the Crips didn't just recruit, they trained thousands of young black teenagers to become what he called urban warriors. They controlled the slums, trafficked weapons, sold drugs, and placed guns into the hands of minors. Every street corner marked by Crips colors became a no-go zone, where bullets replaced words and blood replaced justice. In 1979, Williams was charged in connection with 2 armed robberies, both ending in cold-blooded killings. The first occurred at a gas station in Whittier. Albert Owens, a 26-year-old clerk, was shot twice in the back while lying face down following orders. Nothing was taken, only blood left behind. Weeks later, in a South LA motel, the Yang family, Taiwanese immigrants, were murdered in their bedroom over a few $100s and a television. No survivors, no witnesses. Police never found the murder weapon, no DNA. Just shell casings, testimonies from inmates who had personal grudges against Williams, and claims that he had bragged about the crimes. No one actually saw him pull the trigger. But with his violent history and the looming shadow of the Crips, the jury didn't need more than his name. In 1981, he was sentenced to death. But something happened during his 24 years on death row at San Quentin. Tookie changed. He began writing books, speaking out against violence to students, young inmates, and youth groups in inner cities. He wrote by hand from solitary confinement, using the language of the very streets that once consumed him. Tookie was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 4 times. He became a symbol of redemption. But to the courts, the past could not be erased. Celebrities from Snoop Dogg to Jamie Foxx called for clemency. The governor at the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger, refused. In his final statement, he wrote, "Williams has never admitted guilt. He has never apologized." Tookie declined a special last meal. He requested the standard tray served to all prisoners. No speech, no prayer, no final words. At 12:35, the lethal injection entered his veins. All he left behind was silence, a steady gaze toward the ceiling, and a body slowly going still. As his body was removed, Barbara Becknell, his co-author and partner of 13 years, screamed, "The state of California just killed an innocent man." The truth? No one knows for sure, but one thing remains. If redemption means nothing, then every attempt to change is just a performance before a sentence already sealed by the past. 5th, Shoko Asahara. On this morning of July 6, 2018, inside the Tokyo detention house, there were no bells, no prayers. In a small execution room, Shoko Asahara, the leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult, was escorted to his death. He didn't resist, he didn't speak. His eyes remained closed, as if meditating through his final breath. 30 years earlier, Asahara was praised as a holy man with awakened vision. Born Chizuo Matsumoto to a poor family in Kumamoto Prefecture, he was nearly blind. Not known for kindness, but for his obsession with control. Starting with acupuncture and feng shui classes, he soon shifted to something far more powerful: religion. In 1984, Asahara founded Aum, initially offering yoga and meditation classes. But just a few years later, he declared himself the Eastern Messiah, a prophet who spoke with the god Shiva and warned that nuclear war would destroy the world. Only his followers, he claimed, would survive. His disciples came from all walks of life: engineers, students, doctors, even scientists. They lived in isolation, strictly obeyed doomsday teachings, slept only a few hours each night, worked to exhaustion, and were monitored by mind control devices. By 1989, had begun building weapons labs, experimenting with toxic gases and biological programs. They turned small factories into sarin gas production sites, a nerve agent banned worldwide. Dissenters were silenced internally. Public suspicion grew. But with money and lawyers, the cult dodged all charges until 1994. In Matsumoto, 7 cult members released sarin gas in a residential area, killing 8 and injuring over 140. Police blamed pesticides. The real blow came on March 20, 1995. At rush hour, 5 AUM members boarded separate Tokyo subway trains carrying liquid sarin in plastic bags. They pierced the bags with sharpened umbrella tips. The gas spread. Passengers collapsed. Rescuers fell ill. 13 died. Nearly 1,000 were injured. Tokyo was paralyzed for hours. For the first time since World War II, Japan had faced domestic terrorism. Asahara was found hiding in a bunker near Mount Fuji, surrounded by Buddha statues, cult scriptures, and strange materials. During 8 years of trial, he never spoke. No apologies, no admissions. He sat motionless, as if meditating, while hundreds of victims and survivors watched. On the day of his execution, he declined a sedative. He refused to speak. Just after midnight, the sentence was carried out. No one knows what went through his mind. All that remained was the collapse of a cult that once claimed to save the world, ending in one of the deadliest acts of civilian terrorism in modern Japanese history. 6th, Brandon Bernard. At 9:27 p.m. on December 10, 2020, in Terre Haute, Indiana, Brandon Bernard took his final breath. After 20 years on death row, he died quietly. No cries, no struggle. Moments before the lethal dose reached his heart, he turned toward the victims' families, bowed, and said, "I'm sorry. That's the only words that I can say that completely capture how I feel now and how I felt that day." A simple sentence, yet it carried guilt, regret, and the weight of 2 lost decades. Back in 1999, Brandon was just 18. A member of a Texas street gang called the 212 Piru Bloods, he joined 4 others in a carjacking. The victims were Todd and Stacy Bagley, a married couple doing church outreach. 19-year-old Christopher Villalva forced them into the trunk at gunpoint. Brandon drove. The group made ATM withdrawals, demanding PIN codes, then took the couple to a remote field near Belton Lake. Villalva shot Todd in the head. Stacy, still alive, was left in the car. Brandon, following orders, set the vehicle on fire. No one knows whether Stacy died from the gunshot or the smoke, but by the time the flames died down, both were gone. In a 2000 federal trial, Brandon and Villalva received death sentences. The other 3 were given long prison terms. 20 years later, the case was re-examined. 5 of the original 9 jurors said, "We got it wrong." Angela Moore, the original prosecutor, admitted Brandon was an accomplice, not the mastermind. He didn't plan the killings. He didn't pull the trigger. In prison, Bernard stayed out of trouble. He mentored young inmates, wrote letters, apologized to the victims' families, and hoped for clemency. But in December 2020, under the Trump administration, a wave of federal executions resumed. Brandon became the 9th person executed. He declined a special last meal. Instead, he requested a meat lover's pizza and a small brownie. Simple, just like how he had lived those final 20 years. When asked for final words, he bowed, faced the victims' families, and repeated, "I'm sorry. That's the only words that I can say that completely capture how I feel now and how I felt that day." One apology, raw, honest, human. And then, the pentobarbital entered his veins. His body relaxed. No spasms, no gasps. Brandon Bernard died at 40. He had once taken part in a crime, but he had also tried to make amends. And in the end, the question wasn't whether he was guilty. The question was, should an 18-year-old who committed a crime still be executed after 20 years of reform? 1 crime, 2 deaths, and a sentence that echoed across the world. 7th, Kelly Gissendaner. September 30th, 2015. In the execution chamber at Jackson Prison, Georgia, a woman began to sing. No screaming, no resistance. Just a cracked, low voice breaking on each word of Amazing Grace, a hymn she had chosen to accompany her final moments. Her name was Kelly Renee Gissendaner, a mother of 3, 47 years old, and the first woman to be executed in Georgia in more than 70 years. Her path to this moment didn't begin with a cold-blooded crime. It began with a temptation, a misguided affair, and a plan that couldn't be undone. In 1997, Kelly remarried her ex-husband, Douglas Gissendaner, a kind man deeply devoted to family. But behind his back, she maintained an affair with a younger man, Gregory Owen. Together, they plotted to eliminate Douglas so they could be together, and Kelly could inherit everything. Gregory carried out the murder. Kelly handled the rest, the plan, the tools, the cover-up. Douglas didn't survive, and the truth soon came to light. Gregory confessed and, in exchange for cooperation, received life in prison. Kelly did not. At her 1998 trial, she was sentenced to death, becoming the only woman on Georgia's death row. But that wasn't the end of her story. Over nearly 2 decades in solitary confinement, Kelly converted to Christianity, studied theology, and became a spiritual mentor to other women inmates. She exchanged letters with scholars, including Jürgen Moltmann, one of Europe's most respected theologians. Some women said Kelly saved them from despair, not because she had to, but because she chose to. As her execution date approached, hundreds of thousands signed petitions for clemency. Among them were bishops, former judges, even Pope Francis. Georgia rejected them all. Kelly's final meal reflected how she lived her last years, full but unpretentious. Cheeseburgers, French fries, cornbread, egg salad, cherry vanilla ice cream, popcorn, and lemonade, a simple picnic of sorts. Just before the injection, she turned toward the viewing room where her 2 close friends, Sally and Susan, sat in silence. Her voice cracked. "And I love you, Sally. And I love you, Susan. That amazing man lost his life because of me. I just hope they can find peace." Kelly didn't beg. She took responsibility. And then came the silence, alongside the faint echo of a song she sang at the edge of life and death. 8th, Lisa Montgomery. Terre Haute, Indiana. Early morning on January 13, 2021. In a cold execution chamber, Lisa Montgomery, the first woman executed under federal law in nearly 70 years, lay motionless. There were no cries, no struggle, only the soft motion of a heart tattoo on her thumb, tapping gently against the strap, one final signal, silent yet deeply human. Born in 1968, Lisa grew up in poverty in Kansas. From a young age, she was the victim of sexual abuse by her stepfather. Her mother didn't protect her. She forced her into prostitution as a teenager. Beaten, raped, treated like an object, Lisa carried psychological scars that never healed. She was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and suffered episodes of memory loss. But instead of care, she was mocked, dismissed, and ignored. That quiet suffering lasted years, until it exploded into tragedy. On December 16, 2004, Lisa drove nearly 200 miles to Skidmore, Missouri, pretending to buy a puppy to get close to Bobby Jo Stinnett, a woman 8 months pregnant. At Bobby Jo's home, Lisa carried out a highly serious plan that resulted in the death of a pregnant woman and left with the newborn child. She brought the infant home, claiming it as her own. The case shocked the nation. Police quickly tracked her down. The baby survived. Lisa was arrested less than 24 hours later. In 2007, a federal jury sentenced her to death, and that's when the debate began. Did Lisa deserve to die, given the life of unrelenting trauma she had endured? She didn't kill out of hate or greed. She acted in a psychotic break, driven by a lifetime of untreated pain. Legal experts, psychologists, and human rights groups all pleaded for mercy. Nothing changed. Before her execution, Lisa grew silent. She stopped eating, asked for nothing, skipped breakfast, requested no final meal. She sat beneath bright lights left on 24 hours a day. Her spirit seemed broken, as if she had died long before the sentence was carried out. At 6:31 in the morning, the warden asked, "Do you have any last words?" Lisa responded with just one, soft, muffled by her mask. "No." Then she closed her eyes. No statement, no resistance. Only her thumb, still tapping gently against the strap, a small motion that pierced the hearts of everyone in the room. Lisa Montgomery died at age 52, a mother, a criminal, a victim. Her name forced the legal system to confront one haunting question: where is the line between justice and a lifetime of being forgotten? 9th, Navid Afkari. Shiraz, morning of September 12, 2020. Navid Afkari was led to the gallows. No warning, no final visit, no lawyer, no media. Only death delivered in silence. Navid was a national wrestling champion in Iran, representing his country in the 71-kilogram division. But he didn't die from defeat in the ring. He died for speaking out. In 2018, Iran was rocked by protests against corruption, inflation, and oppression. Among the crowds chanting in Shiraz was 25-year-old Navid. After one protest, a water company employee, Hassan Turkman, was killed. Navid was arrested and accused of murder. There was no surveillance footage, no direct witnesses, no DNA. Just a confession, taken after 50 days in solitary confinement. Navid said he was tortured, beaten, choked, his head slammed against a wall until he passed out. He recanted. He accused the authorities of torture. He asked for a fair trial. It didn't matter. The trial lasted only minutes. Navid was sentenced to death on 2 counts. Murder, under Iran's Qisaas law, which allows the victim's family to demand execution, and moharabeh, or waging war against God, a charge often used against political dissenters. The victim's family refused to grant mercy. Despite global outcry, Iran did not back down. The UFC, IOC, athletes worldwide, even the U.S. president spoke out. The sentence stood. That morning, Navid was given no notice, no last words, no final meal, just a cold gaze toward the sky, and then the drop. His body was returned. No one knows what he was thinking in those final moments, but what he left behind shook the world. The hashtag #NavidAfkari spread rapidly. The IOC called it a dark day for sports. Amnesty International called it a disguised political execution. Iran stayed silent. Navid Afkari died at 27, not for a crime, but for refusing to stay silent. One sentence, 2 deaths. One was a victim, the other a symbol of broken justice. And the question no longer was he guilty? But how many more will die just for speaking up? 10. Patrick Bryan Knight. Texas, June 26, 2007. In the execution room at Huntsville Prison, white lights hummed overhead. At 6:21 p.m., Patrick Bryan Knight took his final breath after 16 years on death row. But what America remembered wasn't the crime, it was his final words, a strange joke before dying. In August 1991, near the remote town of Amarillo, Texas, Walter and Marianne Werner had just returned home when they were abducted by Knight and his accomplice, Robert Bradfield. Blindfolded and forced into a car, they were driven 4 miles into an empty field. No argument. No demands. Walter was shot first. Marianne was killed hours later. Their bodies were left near a ditch, discovered the next morning. When arrested, Knight confessed, "I'm the reason for this crime, Wanushi. I deserve to die," he told the court. Bradfield, the accomplice, received life in prison. Texans were furious. A peaceful couple, harmed for no reason, victims of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. During 16 years awaiting execution, Knight never sought clemency. But he did something unusual. He invited the public to send him jokes, saying he wanted to be the first death row inmate to die laughing. The media was divided. Some saw it as an effort to reclaim his humanity. Others called it a cheap stunt for attention. On execution day, Knight declined a lavish last meal. He requested fried pork chops, fried chicken, garlic bread, and ice cream. Simple dishes, like a roadside diner dinner. When asked for final words, Patrick nodded. His voice trembled. Eyes glossy, he began, "I said I'd tell a joke. Death has set me free. That's the punchline. I deserve this." He thanked friends, thanked God, then pleaded for people not to forget the innocent still behind bars, and finally, he smiled and said, "The final joke is, I'm not Patrick Bryan Knight, and you can't stop this execution. Go ahead. I'm done." A smile, a strange line, and then silence. Knight died as he had lived in his final years, caught somewhere between remorse, doubt, and a biting sense of irony. But no matter what he said, one truth remained. Walter and Mary Ann were gone, and no joke, no matter how clever, could undo that pain. 10 individuals, 10 death sentences, 10 final moments when the world paused to witness a single last breath. But while every eye focused on the one facing execution, something was often forgotten: the victims, who left this world in silence. No one heard their last words. No one asked what they wanted for their final meal. Out there are wives, mothers, children, the ones who survived the crime, but not a single day without the weight of grief. Has anyone told their story? Has anyone ever paused for a moment of silence for them, instead of for the one who took everything away? We can debate justice. We can talk about forgiveness. We can argue over whether the death penalty is right or wrong. But one thing is certain: too many deaths can never be undone. And in those moments, justice doesn't always win. Sometimes all that's left is an ending. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, if you believe the memory of the victims shouldn't be buried in the dark, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Because sometimes, a single story, a single share, might be the only way to keep alive what death tried to erase: memory.